Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Fred Nicora. Looking forward to our conversation, Fred. Really, it's been a long time since our last one, right?
Yeah, I'm excited, Simon. Yeah, and it has been. I think it's almost been a couple of years now.
Yeah.
When I thought about coming onto it, and I love the way that you continually evolve and reformat yourself, reinvent yourself, even and really have taken a sharper focus on healing now. That's kind of a newer bend since I was with you last time, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to talk about that. I think this is going to be a great discussion.
Cool. Me too. I think it's probably the second big change in the podcast. And the podcast has been going almost 2 years now. The first big change was probably September 22 when I decided, okay, it's adoptees all the way. Yes, we'll have some birth mothers, but the adoptive parents, I enjoy talking to them, but I don't have the same level of shared experience to them, and I don't think I learn as much from them as I'd learned from fellow adoptees. So that was the first kind of narrowing down the shift from everybody to pretty much just adoptees and the occasional birth mother. And then the second one, as you say, they were this focus on healing, because it's a word that we use all the time. It's a word that we bandy around, and what I'm getting is that it means pretty much completely different thing to every person that I interview.
Yeah, and I agree with you there 100%. And even what I'm going to say is, as I've reemerged myself into the adoptee community over the last several years, and really learned where the community has evolved to, the word healing is brought up nonstop. But at the same time, it seems like nobody quite necessarily is talking about the exact same thing, the exact same method, the exact same hopeful outcome, or anything. So I think for you to dive into this is phenomenal, and I think my hat's off to you. It's interesting water you're treading in. I'll say that much.
It is very interesting water, and I'm working towards what I thought was a framework at one point, and now I'm seeing as maybe it's a roadmap, and I've been working on it this morning. So basically, I'm trying to distill all the stuff that I get, right? Distill all the stuff that I get into a framework that kind of hopefully it shows hopefully it shows every interaction that I've had, every conversation that I've had on that. Maybe I can't do it that way, but at least then we've got some clarity. So what does healing mean to you, Fred?
I would say for me, healing has, like I mentioned to you before, my hat's off to you for evolving, has really evolved over the years for me as well. I think, given my story where, at the age of 41, I discovered I was adopted, which was about 23 years ago. Sometime now, if you would have asked me then, when I first discovered I was adopted, and I started to immerse myself into the adoptee community, it would be a very different answer than what it is today. And I would say at that time, that answer really would have been a lot more about learning and absorbing and becoming acclimated to a new world. Now, is that actually healing? I think at the time that was. I had a sudden, I'll say, harsh injury, at the discovery. Obviously, there's potential to believe that injury, there were other injuries that occurred along the way that I wasn't necessarily aware of or conscious of. And I'll say today, as opposed to back then, that understanding has become much more externalized, and it's become much more about giving and contributing than it has about absorbing and taking. And today, as I look at it, it's healing for me is becoming aware of and being able to express terms of my contributions to the community at large. And not only that, but also I'm going to say the fuller understanding and acceptance of who I am, what I'm capable of, my total story, and how I can bring that out to work with others.
Wow. There's not much there, really, is there? Hey?
There's a lot. For me, that's a lot. And I'm not there yet. I continue to work on it.
That was British irony and understatement, right?
Yeah.
Just like we don't, yeah. I think the first thing is that it's a natural part of our healing that we want to give. It seems to me that we want to give back, and we want to help people learn some of the stuff that we've learned, right? So we've made some progress forward. We want to we want to give back. I think that's what's really blown me away in the adoptee world, right? And at the same time, wanting to learn from people who are ahead of us on the journey. That's what I'm looking to do. Who can I learn from? Who can I learn from? And where do I have to go, perhaps outside the adoptee community, to get that? I mean, we talked about identity last time we spoke, and if you haven't got this already, listeners, Fred is a late discovery adoptee, right? So so identity is something that we talked about a lot last time, because identity is severely challenged. Identity is a challenge for all adoptees, and I think it's particularly a challenge that happens in the crisis of the moment for the late discovery adoptee, because you've had the rug. I don't know whether this was your metaphor or not, or somebody else. You've had the rug pulled from under your feet. You've lost your grounding. Everything that you thought was true about who you were is, up for grabs. It's lost.
Yeah, and I would, it's interesting as you were talking a bit about it. One of the things that really struck me is, and I'll first of all say, yeah, it for me, I've always compared it. My foundation was underpinned and completely swept away. Suddenly, I'm standing there holding a house up with nothing under it to keep it in place. It was just all gone, And I would say what the biggest takeaway for me, because initially when I discovered I was adopted, I didn't necessarily believe I had a lot in common with other adoptees because of the late discovery nature of my adoption. And as I'll say healed, as I move forward in covering that wound, in learning to live with that wound, and in learning to minimize the negative impacts of that wound, I came to realize that I have a lot in common with adoptees. That as a whole, the fundamental nature of a large part of my psyche, not the whole psyche, but a large part of it, is affected, has been affected even from birth. And for me, it actually clarified a lot of things. Now, what I would say about adoptees as a whole who aren't late discovery, they've had a lifetime to be able to adjust to it, to, I'm going to say, develop that ego to survive in the world wearing that coat, because that coat comes with a lot of meaning and a lot of baggage. And for me, I had, I discovered, and suddenly all of a sudden I found this 3,000-pound coat wearing me down, and I wasn't sure exactly how to deal with it. Whereas I would say most adoptees, they're if they're familiar from early recollection, they start nibbling away at that, how to accept it, how to integrate their persona into what that part of their identity means to them.
Yeah.
And for me, I just had to kind of do that overnight. So
yeah. It's that crisis moment, isn't it?
Yeah, you mentioned it's a crisis, and it was a life crisis.
It's a crisis moment, and it brings it all to focus. So it's it's acute. It's sorry, it's acute rather than chronic. Acute, right?
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the concept of being an adoptee. Um, I would dare say the condition is chronic. It's not anything that you're going to get over. For me as a late discovery adoptee, I think there was an acute event that brought to the surface the chronic condition. And I hate to parallel it only to negative aspects. When we start talking acute versus chronic, we are often talking about illnesses. And yeah, there's some damage that's done. There's some scarring that occurs. There's some healing that needs to take place. But at the same time, and that's part of what I'd like to talk about today too, is as that initial blast cleared, and I started to finally see who I was, what I was capable of, and what those implications of my life story have in terms of how I perceive myself, where I perceive myself going, and how I can express that outwardly to hopefully help others has, I'll say, changed quite a bit. And I think there's also, and I think the best way to explain this is one of the analogies I talk about as I talk to different people is that, for myself, and I'm going to be very just on, very transparent here. I'm a white male in America. Guess what? I don't have that prejudicial rug thrown over my head. I'm not wearing any of the, race cards. I'm getting old, so now I'm doing a bit of the age card, but those things hadn't been part of my understanding. And whereas I was an educator and I had been trained and educated to understand prejudicial thought, I never experienced it from the same viewpoint of somebody that actually had to live in it. And to some extent, I'm going to say adoptees, for the most part, if you take the concept of what a relinquished baby, what a bastard is throughout history, it's not necessarily a pretty thing to be. I can't think of anybody that would say, I'm going to design a life story for myself and I'm going to make myself adopted. You're just not going to go there. So for me, one of the things that it did is it opened my eyes quite a bit, and I would even dare say when I look at, and I respect all disenfranchised elements of society. And this awareness gave me that respect to so much more of an acute level of awareness. So for instance, I think across my society, I'm in the US, you're obviously in England, there's many groups that are disenfranchised. As I think about these different groups, and I think about, for instance, the plight of these different groups, they've had laws enacted that protect them. There are actually laws that say you can't discriminate based on this, you can't discriminate based on that, you can't discriminate, A to Z, what you can and can't discriminate. Well, you can't discriminate based on any of these, I'm going to say, birth attributes, except adoptees are the only group that at the end of the day, it's actually written into law here that you must discriminate upon them. You must give them different rights than the rest of the general population. So all I'm getting to with that is I think there's certain things that I had become aware of that I look at differently now as I look through the lens of being an aware adoptee than I did before. And so that does give me a different view into society. It does, I'm going to say, open my eyes, and maybe there are advantages to that. It's not all disadvantages.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what I would see as the core issue for us adoptees in that beautiful, expansive definition that you had of healing. And you said acceptance of who I am. Acceptance of who I am. So we can look at all the external stuff. Yes, let's look at the external stuff. And I nearly said but then. And let's focus on the internal. Let's focus on the internal stuff. So
Sure.
acceptance of who I am. So what does that mean to you?
Initially, when I found out I was adopted, I I had to wear the coat that I had constructed of what it meant to be adopted. And that was from the viewpoint of somebody that wasn't adopted. And being, I'm going to say, even privy to the conversations of people who are not adopted, of things that wouldn't be said to somebody that is adopted. Maybe comments about behavior, maybe comments about what it must have been like for them, or why they act the way they do, and quite honestly, being somebody that was on the other side. And I guess if you run around and don't tell anybody you're adopted, you'll hear some of those same conversations, because it's not a color we're painted, it's what's going on in the inside. So for me, part of it became well, I'll say initially, part of it became coming face to face with some of the stigma and things I had to learn that I actually did believe inside, and find out how I reassessed those as I found out that I actually fit into those categories. Whereas before that, I really didn't think that. So I think for me, that gets a little more complicated, just in that I had to come to terms with who I am as a different type of a person, or as a person that actually had many of the attributes. And I'm not going to say I thought bad things about adoptees, but I'm going to say I believe, like, oh, they act out. They can be kind of sensitive about some things, So I had to all of a sudden accept those things about myself and reevaluate how I felt about wearing some of those, I'm going to say, preconceived notions that I would have had as somebody that didn't realize they were adopted. So that was a big part of it. And for me, accepting that and accepting who I am at that level. The other level is to understand that my story started 3 months before anybody's ever told me about it. And I didn't even think to put two and two together before that, to say that, now that I think about it, I've never heard a baby story about myself. Everybody's always talking about when I was sitting up or doing something, but I never heard about, like, what it was, what was it like when I was born? Did mom have an easy delivery? Did she have a bad delivery? Did she have a good delivery? You know, did I cool? I never heard any of those, and I had to kind of understand that. And beyond that, it even came down to understanding at a different level. And so I'm a person that's been in reunion for years. Started 20 years ago. So my mother has died since then, but other people, I've actually got some relationships that I've been in reunion with them, going on 20 years now. And when I look at that, those are all part of my story, and they're part of the story that actually is part of me that goes beyond what I had been consciously aware of. And as that's continued to evolve, I've also become aware of what my biological history is, and how it integrates into who I am, what I'm part of, that I'm a continuation, and Simon, I sell gluten-free breads at farmers markets. That's one of the things I do. I have a number of things I do. And not this last weekend, the weekend before, it was crazy. It was just crazy, because I ended up in this farmers market. I'm part of this group. It's called Food, Faith, and Farming. And I ended up in a place that was like 70 miles from my house. And it was in southeastern Wisconsin. It was then they tend to be at churches. It was at a place called Norway Lutheran Church. And Norway Lutheran Church is in Norway, Wisconsin. Guess what? At that church, in the old church graveyard, my grandfather, my great, 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 great grandfather, and great, 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 great grandmother are buried.
And how did you find that out? It's really spooky.
I had actually found, I had gone through prior to that and done there's a site, I think you can find it in England too. It's called Find a Grave, and Find a Grave will allow you to trace back. Now, a little bit about my own story, that my mother, my biological mother, had a shameful experience back in the 50s when she had me, and so she prevented me from really kind of doing much with her family while she was alive. After she passed away, I dug deep, and I found where she was from, where her family was from. Actually, and it took me a while before I could even psychologically get to the place where I could do that. I think that was something I didn't want to look at. I still had to heal from that wound. Because I'll say, even that, a lot of people will look at the wounds that we have as adoptees as being the wounds that we got from the basis of relinquishment. But I'm going to say, when you go into reunion and things don't match your expectations, there's a lot of loaded words I just put in there. Expectations, very loaded word. You end up with a wound. You meet your biological mother, and all of a sudden she says, you know what? You were the most shameful thing that ever happened to me. My God, you better stay in the closet. You got it? Ouch.
Yeah.
So wounds, just because you start going through reunion, you start healing, doesn't mean you're not going to encounter some other wounds that you're getting through there. And it's, how do you deal with those? Where do they become? So I'm going to say part of that healing process from even that wound was finally, and I'm going to say it was probably 6-7 years after she had passed away, that I finally could look at her family, that I could finally, not in person, but just start researching it, find out where they're from, who they are. They were some of the first Norwegians that came to this country and settled in Wisconsin. It was crazy. It just went way back. And so I found actually, so technically I had been to that gravesite before, but it just so happened this rotating farmers market plopped me right there where my great, 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 great grandparents were buried.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, for me, that's healing. That is healing. Connecting with those people that are buried in the ground there, and recognizing that I am the continuation of them, regardless of whether I was given up at birth or not.
Yeah. Well, again, there's so much there. Let me just narrow it down, the focus then, because this acceptance, accepting who I am, right? Accepting who I am. Largely, I think of that as kind of self-esteem sort of stuff. But I've got the feeling that you mean it slightly differently. I don't know.
Yeah. Again, my situation, and those who have, I'm going to say, late life discoveries, genetic surprises. So, as you talk about the communities in which we're involved, I'm basically at the intersection of two communities. One is the adoptee community at large, and then the other is the MPE and NPE communities, which are the surprises later in life. Well, I've got both of them wrapped up in one nice little package here. So as you get into that, and I'll say maybe more unique to the MPE, NPE, there is a fair amount of acceptance of a different person than what you were led to believe you were. Whereas I think most adoptees, if they're aware that they're adopted early on, they may have that as they develop. You could answer the question better than I can. But what I would say is, and maybe they go through a similar type of a metamorphosis or, of evolution when they come to terms with deciding they want to seek out their birth family and maybe go into reunion, and they grapple with some of those questions, because those are going to open doors that are going to show you perhaps you're somebody you didn't know you were. If you start meeting people, if you start finding out about those people, you're suddenly going to find you have attributes and perhaps traits that came from somewhere that up till that point you didn't necessarily see in yourself, or didn't recognize in yourself, or understand that were part of you. So I think that's a big blanket. The other part, I'm going to say, is for myself, and I think adoptees as a whole, and I can speak probably better to those that went through reunion. When I discovered, I immediately went into seeking a replacement for that foundation. So I didn't have any pause of like, oh, do I want to look or do I not want to look? I never did a yes or no, should I or shouldn't I? I dove deep right in, and then just found restrictions. I found I was technically barred from knowing who I was until I cleared all the hoops and played the game, and in the particular state in which I'm in. But so I'd say with many adoptees, And I guess I'd ask the question, do you feel that was your case, as you went through reunion? And have you been, yeah, you've been through reunion, haven't you? I believe you.
Well, I found out that my birth mother had died,
Oh, okay.
and when for many years it was a should I, shouldn't I search, and then it became in a very emotional moment. It became a no brainer. I had to search. Right.
Yeah.
Then I found out that she died, and then and I'd never. Well, I'd never had any inkling or questioning over the birth father stuff. Birth father. Well, never is. That's an overstatement. I'd had a lot less consideration about searching for my birth. A lot less consideration about searching for my birth father than I did for my birth mother. But I actually called him out of the blue last October, and got blown out by him. And
What do you mean blown out by him?
well, the conversation didn't go very well, and it ended. But it didn't end with it didn't end with him slamming the phone down, but it ended with him saying, "Don't call this number again." So, and I was remarkably unfazed by that. You talked about the expectations thing, right?
Yeah.
I made that call with very few expectations, because I viewed it as an experiment, and the experiment was, has he changed his mind, basically, because he didn't want to know anything about. He didn't want to be in the baby's life before the baby was born, right? So that the two of them had been going out together for 5 months. She told him that she was pregnant. He didn't want anything to know, right? So 57, whatever it is, years later, I call him completely out of the blue, and don't handle the conversation particularly well. But I don't, it really doesn't matter how I would have handled the situation. I'm pretty sure that I would have got to the same result. So the fact that I wasn't bothered by what he did, I saw that as a sign of my progress. So to go to the bigger point about the comparison between a late discovery adoptee like you and somebody that's always known like me, I didn't have a before. You had a before and an after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before crisis, after. I had no before.
Yeah.
Only no crisis in being told, and therefore no after, really. For me, it would be the bigger points people might talk about would be the before and after, would be those moments of coming out of the fog. I think for us, that would be a better comparison.
Yeah, perhaps. It's interesting because when I do look at my before, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I want to talk a little bit about healing too, because it's fascinating. And even our dialogue of what your story is, where you were surprised at how little the negative conversation affected you. That's what I'm pulling out of what you're telling me. And and I'm not, by any means, I'm not challenging you on this. I'm looking for a dialogue because, again, I'm trying to wrap my head around all of it too. It's interesting because when I look at healing, what is healing for us? Is healing trying to make us feel less, or is it trying to make us feel more? Is it trying to make us be more affected by things or less affected by things? We look at, theoretically, we come out as, I'm going to say, a package ready to be wired. Obviously for us as adoptees who go through some very early trauma, are impacted by it, I believe. And we've talked about that, maybe some significantly, some less so. At the end of it, what is our goal in healing? Is our goal to feel more? Is it to allow ourselves to feel more? Or is it to have ourselves feel the negative less? Or is it a combination or a hybrid? As you talk about the before and after, I know a lot of healing of post-traumatic stress disorder is based off the concept you're trying to bring the person back to pre-trauma personality. You're trying to reintroduce them to how they were before the trauma and allow them to move through life more closely aligned with who they were before that trauma than what they became after that trauma. That gets interesting because when I look at my trauma point, when I discovered that was one trauma, I think there were other things. So even when you look at who I was as a result of being relinquished at birth, spending up to 3 months in, probably an orphanage, potentially a foster home situation, probably a lot of additional trauma went on there. So I don't want to go back to that person. I'm glad I'm out of the closet. I'm glad I know this person's a much better person. And that person was struggling a bit, struggling a lot. But.
Fascinating stuff about feeling less negative feelings.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that has come to me. I've got to a question. I had a question that was kind of similar to yours. So, am I pleased about this feeling less negatively impacted than I thought I was going to be? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, I'm right. I understand fully, and that's why, to me, it's a fascinating topic and discussion.
So yeah. I mean, I look at feeling more. Yeah. Not blocking it up. Not stuffing it.
Yes,
not stuffing, not trying to, not suppressing the feeling, not becoming a robot. And when I'm going through this framework of roadmap for healing, that's kind of one of the things I'm setting out. Like, so is it feeling less insecure, or feeling more secure, or is it caring less about our feeling less secure? Do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
for me, it's about less judgment. Well, grace. Let's call it grace, right? So I used to worry about being worried. I used to be. I used to be, and now I do that a lot less. I used to be angry about being angry, whereas now I'm more grace. Now I don't beat myself. I beat myself up less for my negative, for what could be seen as negative emotions. It's grace. So instead of trying to suppress the anger, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. And inside, you're really I'm really bubbling up. It's more about grace and I never use this word, but equanimity, right? So, and I don't really know what that word means, but I give it a go. It's being kind of less bothered about how I feel.
Well, I think, and I'm going to say for me, as we talked about, there's a lot of different interpretations of how healing looks, within the adoptee community. And I think for me, my goal, I want to be able to feel. That's the human condition. I get 70, 80 years of being able to feel as a human. I want to make sure I feel what I'm supposed to feel. However, at the same time, I want to be in a place where those feelings, the negative feelings, the hard feelings, the feelings that create pain and discomfort, have less of a negative impact on my life and how I feel about life. And I think that's what you were talking about. That, and that's how I see healing is, and that's what I want to accept them. I want to be able to feel the discomfort of losing somebody, of having a loss of somebody. But at the same time, I want to be able to accept that at a level where it doesn't destroy my life, it doesn't dwell on me, it doesn't create, compulsive behavior cycles that hurt my life. And to me, that's what the healing is. It's not necessarily numbing, it's more the accepting the totality of the emotions and living in a comfortable place within yourself with those emotions.
Yeah. And when I was thinking about that, you used that word whole, right? So it's the end, in literal terms, it's the end of healing is feeling whole or being whole, right? Or it's the starting point, right? So one of the most interesting things that came to me last year was there's a difference between feeling whole and being whole. Feeling and being. So healing, we could look at healing on two levels here, right? Healing from an emotional perspective is about our feelings, and at a lower level than that, we were always whole anyway. The different,
I know as, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm more interested in who I am than how I feel. The acceptance of the whole, right? The acceptance of the whole of our emotions. So we've had that, you and I had that discussion before, the 12 steps in sobriety and all stuff like that. And something that I spoke to, something that really landed for me, speaking to Pamela Karanova, who talks about her 27-year relationship with booze, was accepting the whole of her emotions rather than trying to numb through booze. So the whole, being whole and accepting the whole of our emotions. And I haven't really got that. I haven't really got that, the detail on that nailed down yet. But there seems to be a link for me, feeling whole, accepting the whole of our feelings, and knowing the whole of who we are, and acceptance rather than stuffing and denying. I'm waffling a bit. Sorry, Fred. Go for it.
Yeah. No, you've got a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. It's interesting as we talk about Pam, and I'm a person that came to terms with alcoholism and drug addiction, and been in sobriety for quite some time now. I know Pam's in a little different place with it, as in terms of how she views it today versus how I view it today, which is fine. I think both of us have found places that we're comfortable with, and if her model's working for her, awesome, and mine seems to be working for me, so awesome on that one. I think we get into what I would call a very interesting area, and that has to do with the numbing. And the numbing, because I think the numbing can come in two ways. There's a numbing, I think, if you look get scar tissue, and I'm going to say the physical scar tissue. I cut myself in the leg, a scar forms over it, and that scar that forms over it will be numb. Nerves don't grow back into it. It doesn't allow for the sensation of feel. Scar tissue just doesn't, because it can't. So that's one side of numbing. The other side of numbing is experiencing the feeling, but medicating that feeling away. And I think they're both important to look at, whether you actually take action to numb something you feel, or you simply can't feel. And so I would say, to some extent, and I wonder, and it's an open-ended question in my mind, has the scar tissue, the psychological scar tissue that's been inflicted, that really can't feel, is that capable of ever feeling? I don't know, But what I would say is, just as I want to minimize the amount of negative impact from feeling, I also want to maximize the amount of feeling that I'm capable of. And I think the acceptance is, again, finding a place where I can be comfortable even with the discomfort of some of those feelings.
Yeah. So it's being okay about not feeling okay.
Okay about not feeling okay. No, I want to feel okay. I guess so. Yeah, because you're saying okay about not feeling okay. I guess so. Yes, it's coming to a place where, because at the end of the day, hot is hot, cold is cold, and our body's programmed to feel those in different ways. I don't want my body to feel hot is cold or cold is hot, but I want to be able to get to a place where, when I feel hot, I'm all right with feeling hot. And maybe sometimes for adoptees, not all, I'm not categorically throwing a blanket here, but maybe adoptees don't feel comfortable in the realm of love, that has to do with attachment. And so how do I get to a place where I do feel comfortable with some of those things that might feel uncomfortable for me? And that's, to me, what the healing is accepting that those feelings are real, but learning how to minimize the negative impact of those feelings as you move forward in life.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. So what do you think helped? We spent, was it Einstein said that if somebody gives me an hour to solve a problem, I want to spend the first 55 minutes defining the problem. And the last 5 minutes, and then the answer will become clear, something like that.
So yeah, I was going to jump in here because I want to get some stuff in here I really wanted to talk about.
Go for it.
So to me, what has been fascinating, okay, as you know, I wrote a book, and I'll say my journey of writing has turned out to be very interesting and enlightening as it pertains to healing. Because initially, when I wrote the book, I'm going to say, I don't necessarily believe I was looking at it to make $1 million or retire from anything from the book, but I didn't necessarily understand what my inner drives and motives were for getting me to tackle this big piece of work and put myself out there. And incidentally, from the time I wrote the book till the time I actually got it published was probably about 12 years. And some of that was just me sitting on it thinking, like, in retrospect, I don't know if I'm ready to, open up this part of me to the rest of the world. There was fear there was humiliation there was the lack of humiliation there was a lot there that I had to get through, and I worked through, and I got to that place. And I'm going to say some of what got me there was the healing to get to that point. For me personally, some of that was putting down a bottle. I had to do that helped facilitate the healing. I later found out that actually that book then became a piece that it actually was a vehicle to allow for dialogue. And that dialogue was the engagement of an inner expression to an outer world, and a flow back and forth of not only information, but feelings. As I talked to other adoptees, as other birth mothers, with other birth adoptive parents, and even the population at large, suddenly I'm not only finding that I've accepted these parts of me, but I'm also opening those doors and others are accepting that. And that is creating validation that's going both ways and helping me to heal further. My latest venture, and this is the stuff I'm just having a blast with, and I'm finding it is so cathartic, it's not even funny. I'd encourage anybody to try and stumble down this road, and it's a hard road. I'm into screenwriting now. I'm trying to take pieces and actually not only, let's say look at a memoir, but how do I turn this into physical characters? How do I work with these characters? And you know what? The most cathartic characters for me to date have been creating characters that are based off my birth mother, my birth father, my adoptive mother, my adoptive father, and other people that have been involved in my journey. Not necessarily that these are factual characters that are relying on factual pieces of information, but they're characters that I've created a reality for, put in a world, set in motion. And that has created tremendous healing. It's allowed me to accept all those parts of my life at such a greater expanse. And I would encourage anybody to do that, not just for the sake of selling a book, selling a screenplay, but for the sake of allowing themselves to understand those facets of themselves at a much deeper level.
So has creating those characters helped you heal because it's given you empathy for them?
I would say that's a fair statement. I think it's yes. It's allowed me. Okay, just as you said, you weren't able to meet your birth mother because she had passed away. My birth father passed away prior to me even discovering I was adopted. So it's allowed me to connect the bits and pieces that I put together about who he was into a person that I can then incorporate into something that's part of me. That's part of my journey, part of my story. And now that's a person that has a totality to it.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I shouldn't hold it only to screenwriting or writing a book, writing a memoir. I don't know if I think Brad Ewell. He's
I've crossed paths with him. I haven't interviewed him yet, but
okay, he's another late discovery adoptee. That's why I bring it up. He's really into visual arts right now, and it's so fascinating. He's using it as a vehicle of expression and a vehicle. This is my own interpretation of it. I've got a bit of a art history background, but it's his expression, his interpretation of that expression that he's bringing out to the world and offering for critique and inviting a dialogue around what he's doing. And I think that's where, for me, that being able to express and expose, shine light into those dark corners is what really helps bring about that healing.
So it's the opening up then. That's the driver. That's the healing element.
I think so. Yeah, I would say so.
So if some of the healing parts of this are if empathy, for understanding others, and empathy is one part of this, and opening up and the vulnerability around that is another part. What other parts does the what other parts do you see of the whole of healing, of this creative endeavor?
As I mentioned before, one of the, and I'm going to say there's a couple of layers. The first layer that struck me as you were talking, empathy. If empathy is part of it, well, if you start thinking about what empathy is, you can't have empathy for anything until you let down your inner blocks from allowing yourself to feel what you're perceiving another is going through. So to some extent you are, as we were talking about before, getting to a level with empathy that you are accepting the feelings surrounding a situation. So as I talk about my birth mother, who maybe I had some negative interactions with. Or maybe I talk about my birth father, who it was clear he didn't step up to the plate when I was conceived. There's negative feelings for that. There's hard feelings, there's hurtful feelings from some of that. And so for me to get to a place where I can have empathy means I've started to work around and accept those negative feelings, but not let those negative feelings alter my path and my ability to grow and move forward in situations surrounding them. I don't know, does that make sense to you?
No, but that's because you're way brighter than me on this stuff, I think. I think for me, the key word seems to be perspective, right? So if I think of the most healing of my moments of my life was breaking down to break through, as people say, being in floods of tears as I read the letter from my birth mother to the social worker, right? And when I realized, when I got a glimpse of her perspective, when I saw her powerlessness, when I saw her love for me, where I saw her love for me, where I saw her the power imbalance, so the social work had all the power, she had no power, where I saw her desperation, and all of that stuff happened. All that stuff was going through my head, all coming out in, snotty tears, and I felt at one with her. There's that saying, we're not spiritual beings. We're not human beings having spiritual experience. We're spiritual being having 7 million human experience, right? So that was, looking back on that moment, maybe 8 years ago, something like that. I saw the world through her eyes, because her and me were one in that moment. So that's kind of it's uber radical empathy. I think it's infinite empathy in that moment, and also in that moment it completely blew away the last vestige of this idea that she didn't love me.
Well, I think, and what, as I'm listening to you, what I'm hearing and what I am really relating to is, for us, and there's two components to it. One is going to be a societal dialogue that we hear and accept, and then the other is just our inner feelings with the lack of knowledge, and that has to do with the hurt and pain an adoptee feels about being rejected from their birth mother. The plain, simple truth for all of us is, for one reason or another, our birth mothers rejected us. Now, we don't understand the story, and there's pain involved in that. It's tough. And that to me is getting to, and as you talked about yours, and I'm going to talk about mine, being able to get to the place where I can feel empathy for her means I've had to overcome the pain of feeling rejected by her. I have to be able to look beyond that in order to get to that place of empathy. Because quite frankly, you stand somewhere, there's an explosion and a bright light. You can't see beyond that bright light until the dust settles. And you start looking beyond what's around there. What was the cause? What initiated it? And that helps you get a different perspective. But initially, you really can't look at it. And I think so when you get to a place of empathy, whether it's for your birth mother, whether it's for your birth father, whoever it is, you've healed to the point where you can accept the bad feelings and are able to start to contextualize and understand at a deeper and larger level what you're part of and that you're not the center. And by doing that, I think you allow for a sincere connection. And that's the empathy that you feel. That's how I see it.
So what healing moments come to your mind, Fred?
Healing moments? I think, we were talking about before when I went to this farmer's market, and I ended up in this place where my great grandparents are, my ancestors. Part of me is there. I'm actually part of what carried forward from there, and for me, and it's kind of crazy, but standing around this place and thinking about all of the people that were around there as somebody's being buried, standing at this church, recognizing that baptisms, that, regular Sunday service, everything, this was a community event. And I am part of these people here, and feeling that connection of what I'm part of, that I'm part of a greater whole, brought about a lot of healing. It brought about a lot of the ability to look beyond my initial blast and understand and have empathy for all those that had been around my line before I even got there.
Yeah. So, what see, for me, the similarity seems to be the connection thing. So, like, if we look at a theme, looking at a theme for the last hour, it's connection. Like, so you felt connected in that in that graveyard. I felt connected when I read that letter.
Mm-hmm.
The engagement with the adoptee community is about connection. So it looks like, to me, it looks like a little bit of a theme. It doesn't tie the whole thing together, but it's one of the more dominant themes in the conversation.
Yeah, it's connection. To me, definitely is a big part of it. And I think for me, what I can say, and it goes both internally and externally, sad but true, but we are social creatures. So there's not only that, I'm going to say, validation at an external level, that there's a level of acceptance, from the world around us, but also just internally, that that connection helps me validate the totality of my story, even that empathy that you were talking about. And what I'm going to say is, we all, and most adoptees have a very similar story, not at all, but uh, whoever our birth fathers were didn't step up to the plate at some point. I mean, many cases there can be other twists and turns, and maybe there was valid reasons for that, but we don't know that. But again, we have to get to a place, and I think that's where the healing is, when you can get around the negative emotions, and I'm going to use a strong, I'm going to say, word here, forgiveness, finding that within the contextual setting of what the circumstances were around the events that leaded up to relinquishment, of you, of me, of all adoptees, and then being able to work beyond that and actually find empathy for the people and the decisions they made.
Yeah,
I think that, to me, is a definitive marker of healing, that it shows that we've moved beyond that initial painful state of the scar and have moved into later development of what turns that scar into healthy tissue, healthy experiences, a healthy whole life.
And didn't connection find you though?
Didn't connection explain it? I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, you were in that graveyard, and connection found you.
Yeah, and
It
connection.
was a spontaneous. It was a spontaneous moment of connection.
That's a fair statement. Hadn't thought of it that way. Because I went to the graveyard. The graveyard didn't come to me. I mean, that could be the whole segue into a horror movie script, and I don't want to go there.
Me neither, mate. No.
But yes, you could say the connection found me. That does give it an added level of dimension too. And I think that ties back into your we're actually physical manifestations of a spiritual world, and are those spirits still part of what is there? That's a complex one, and I'm above my pay grade here. So
Yeah. But you put yourself, you took yourself to that graveyard.
yes, yeah.
The invitation came. You could have said, I'm not going to that farmer's market, so I'm not going to go to that graveyard. So you went there, but when you were there, connection found you. I didn't, and the reason I could see it, or the reason I'm postulating like that is I didn't go and get that file with that. I didn't know the letter was in it, but I didn't go for that, to get that file, looking for empathy. I didn't think, I didn't think, well, now all I need to do then, okay, to heal, I need to empathize with my birth mother. How am I going to do that? Well, I can do this, this, and this. It's not. It wasn't a. It wasn't a. It was a spontaneous empathy moment, not a premeditated kind of pre-planned.
Well, yeah, and now if you want to go down a deep rabbit hole here, now we'll talk about the subtext of the dialogue, and that has to do with the conscious versus unconscious, and what are we really trying to do? Why does any adoptee want to start to pursue finding their factual past? I mean, I think from that standpoint, when we're all standing at that crossroad, it would be much easier to not look. It would be much easier to not look. Something makes us look at that flame, and something draws us closer to it. And so is that at a subconscious level a drive we have? Is that part of our natural spiritual self seeking to heal, to become whole?
Well, funny you should say that. I love the flame thing. And yeah. So the flame, if this, playing that metaphor forward, right? Yes. How do I put this? So the guy that I name check quite a lot, the guy that I quote a lot on the podcast, a guy called Rupert Spira, he explains this moth to the flame. So in his analogy, the flame is who we truly are, and the moth is the ego, and the ego is drawn to the flame, but then it backs off because it knows it has to die to, for two to become what, for two, when two become one, it's the death of the ego, and we are reunited. We are one. The ego.
And I'll even say, as you were talking before about suddenly out of nowhere, what, a few years ago, you decided you were going to go knock on your biological father's door. What was that about? I mean, think about it. It would have been far easier to just not do it, but something compelled you. Something inside said, I need to fly closer to the plane. I need to take a look in there. Now is, and I don't want to go to is did it do what it was supposed to do? Have you, is that thirst quenched where it's at? Or are there additional flights that will occur that'll get you closer? I mean, I don't know the answer. I don't know if you know the answer, but I think that's, especially for us as adoptees, I believe, and I think I'm being an extrovert here, Simon. I'm talking before I think. So as I do that, if I stumble somewhere, please forgive me. But I think many adoptees, that is the coming out of the fog. That suddenly they're at a point, because I didn't experience that. The day I found out I was adopted is the day I started to see. But as I talk to more and see more and look at their stories and understand their paths, that at a point they decide they have to get closer to that flame. They have to get in there and look at it. They no longer can exist in the comfort of the orbit level they're at. And something drives them to dive deeper. And is that part of our inner nature, that it's actually a healing that we finally are able to embark on that journey? I don't know.
I think there are plenty more flights ahead of us.
I think so too.
Yeah. Feels like a good place to bring it into landing.
Yes.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thanks, listeners. I hope you've enjoyed. Did you notice what happened at the end? Yeah, fantastic, Fred. Loved it. I hope you love it too, listeners. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I appreciate it.
And as always, check out the show notes and get Fred's book, right? Okay. See you soon. Bye.